But that being said, let's talk about sort of some of the things that Hollywood touches on. Like when you see a scene in a movie that sets up a Victorian seance, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Is it kind of like this scene behind us?
Yeah. Right now I've got movies flashing through my brain right now. And some of the more recent ones, like the Ouija movies, maybe the Conjuring movies that are out now.
Okay.
It's they focus entirely on the spirit board, but there's one movie out there that comes to mind. It was made back in 1980s called The Changeling.
Yes.
With George C. Scott. And in this movie, at one point, they set up a seance to contact the spirit of this child that was haunting the house. Not to give away too much of the story, that if anybody's never seen it, it's a pretty good movie. And what I found interesting watching this, and I do still have a copy today, I watch it every now and again. And in this seance that they do, they combine two techniques together, is that they do automatic writing combined with recording for EVPs.
Oh, okay.
That's very interesting in this movie that they kind of branched out into two separate categories.
Right.
And just combined it all together. But the rest of it, it's Hollywood. It's it's writing. It's the writers. It's the script writers.
Right.
Yeah, and as we say, on the TV shows, it's all about ratings, right?
Right. Yes. So interestingly enough, too, speaking of the Ouija board, I mean, that sort of first came on the market in the 1880s, right? So it sort of followed that spiritualist movement, the Fox sisters, all of that. And it kind of, appeared in the 1880s as a parlor game, right?
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting concept that, we've kind of had this board around since that time period, and that it's just become part of the vernacular of, these kinds of occurrences.
I think the board, as you say, it's been around forever.
Yeah.
Dates back to ancient China.
Right.
And what it really is today is it took off in a different direction, as you say, when it became a board game. When it was marketed and
marketed that you could keep
marketed by Hasbro.
Yeah. And that's the more modern version. I think there was a novelty company back in the late 1800s in the US that had marketed the device, the game originally. And then I think it was probably around the 1920s or 30s that Hasbro took over the marketing for it and kind of ran with it. And, then it was in everybody's closet with their checkered boards and their Monopoly game. I know when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and that, pretty much everyone had Monopoly and Ouija board in their closet where it was games. It's like, what do you want to play today? I don't want to play with that one, thanks. But interestingly enough, I mean, we also get into things like table tipping, right? Which is an interesting adventure in, proving that spirits are there by having this table, while your fingers and the table is moving around out from under you. And I happened to be at an event at one point where this was going on in a room that was filled with 18 tables of seances happening. And this table tipping was going on. And I can tell you that it was very distracting for other people who were trying to operate, in a slightly different vein of seance. But table tipping was something that was very popular. We have things like table knocks, and we have all of these different, response and, call and response kind of activities that surrounded the seance. And in, sort of legit terms of a seance, in the UK, some of these ones that were done by, people in societies, again, it's really hard to say how much of it was really true and how much of it was gimmick, right? To make people believe that, they were being contacted by their loved ones. I mean, there was some really elaborate techniques that were implied, everything from, spirit cabinets to ectoplasm to ghosts flying through the room to people, leaving their bodies and a spirit would come in, which is kind of like the spirit cabinet, right? You would have your medium walk into the spirit cabinet and out would come this ethereal being and, give you all of these, talk to you about the spirits of your loved ones. And unfortunately, it's really difficult to get past a lot of these tricks. There was a very well-known trick employed at many commercial fairs and festivals that traveled in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States and probably in Canada as well, where you would have a psychic who would come up on stage and that psychic would answer your questions for you. And it's a very easy technique. Whereas in the modern terms, it was done slightly differently, but in those times, you would have written down your question on a piece of paper, right? And you would have deposited those questions into a vase or a box or a hat or whatever the receptacle was as you walked into the seance. And once everybody was seated, somebody would take that hat and they would then go and they would pull certain questions and they would relate those questions to that person. And they would know because the person would have written their name down after the question, but also too, they would have done a little bit of pre-research. And then of course, the question that the psychic was receiving was always one that they knew the answer to. Right. So they'd already knew ahead of time because they had these scouts that would go out into the area where people were waiting or into the audience in front of the stage before the show, if it was like outside of a, carnival or a fair. And they would talk to people in the audience and they would pretend that they were just somebody there too. And they'd be like, oh my goodness, what are you here for? And of course, people will just tell you their life story, right? And of course, now they take that. They get the person's name and then they attach it to the question and then that goes to the psychic on stage and and then we have all of this. And the movie Red Lights was kind of one of those based around that. And if you have you seen Red Lights with Sigourney Weaver? Oh my gosh, no. Check it out. It's actually a really, really good film with a really great twist at the end that you don't expect. But it's based on this kind of psychic show that goes on. So we have all of these things. So I know that some of the classic standards, and this applies either UK or over here, was again seated around a table. Everybody would hold hands, and that holding of the hands was to help to generate a oneness amongst everyone and a connection and the energy. And if you broke away, then you broke that, energy for the spirit. And then, of course, that spirit would just vaporize and would disappear. There's some very, very elaborate things that went into seances at that period. And I think that that's what's so fascinating. When I present a Victorian seance, I literally present a Victorian seance. So when you come out, you get to see, you get to experience some of these, that's something different. But when we do this, we present it in a way where you experience first a Victorian seance where we use some of the gimmicks. And then we bring somebody up from the audience and they sit down with us at the table. And, we might bring 4 or 5 people up from the audience and sit down. And then we begin the legitimate portion of the show, if you want to go there. But at the same time, when we do these little moments of, what happened in the Victorian era in gimmick seances, we do explain it to the audience, which they're really fascinated with, because it's like, oh, I remember seeing that in this movie. And a lot of people have questions about how it's done. And I don't actually ever tell you how it's done. I'm not going to give away the secrets, but we are going to tell you what some of those things were that were utilized. So, I mean, it's such an expansive topic. And if we really wanted to sit down and pick it apart, we can get into just going through setting up a seance, right? And quickly, I'll just run through that. The idea there is that, again, you're inviting people into a location, be it your home, the parlor of your home, the dining area of your home, or there is, a location, a secret location that you're going to do this. And this was very big in the Victorian era. It made you feel like you were part of this, secretive occult society where only certain people got to be privy to this kind of experience. And that was probably 90% of the buildup for most people attending these seances, whether it was in the UK or if it was over here. The buildup to the seance, the medium, the person who was giving out the messages, was often mysterious and generally Eastern European, be it yes or no, with a terribly bad accent or otherwise. It was that indication of them being, somehow tuned in to the spirits. All of it really is a bit of a facade, right? That was used. And even at what I would consider legitimate, there's a lot of quotes going on today, legitimate experiences, it would really depend on the medium that was running the seance and, what was in it for them. I mean, other than a pretty good chunk of cash, right? Because they were paid very well to do this. Yeah. So it's a lot of, it's a lot of, is it real? Is it not real? Is it live? Is it Memorex? There's something for people who of a certain age won't get. But again, I'm so open to the idea of pretty much anything happening at a seance, legitimately or otherwise. But I mean, we've had so many things happen that were unexpected, that we didn't expect to happen, like knocking and things falling. And, I know that, like, we don't have any setups unless I'm doing a show, like the actual Victorian seance show, then that's different. But if we're actually doing a seance, like, I've had all kinds of things happen, just all kinds of things that we cannot explain. So again, energy in the room, the people that attend, what do they bring with them? Are they bringing in any spirit attachments? Are they bringing in any kind of energy that's either good, bad, or indifferent? All of this can really affect a seance, right? And I think that what we think about now when we think about Victorian seances is it has this romantic notion attached to it. And that's why, yes. Right? That's why it's so appealing. It's like, why is it so appealing? I mean, we do the same thing now. We're all sitting around in our ghost show t-shirts and, or whatever it may be. And we're sitting in a group and we're doing this. It doesn't have that, that sort of romantic, darkened, wood paneled room with a table and certain people from, certain brackets of society that are amongst the group, or this medium that, we don't know anything about. And, they have a they have a very interesting persona, and their name supersedes who they are. And